Welcome to Medieval History Channel 97, where the echoes of the past come alive. Step into the world of knights, castles, and forgotten legends as we journey through time together. Let history speak. Ever pondered the genuine experience of living in those majestic medieval castles? Cast aside the fairy tales and fantastical films, and let's delve into the reality of castle life from sunrise to sunset, when even monarchs themselves awoke with aching backs. This promises an intriguing story. While modern complaints might center on memory foam mattresses being too soft or too firm, medieval inhabitants slept on what was essentially a sack of straw, often unchanged since the previous harvest festival. Imagine the weight of the straw beneath your body, coarse, unyielding, and unforgiving. The very thing meant to cradle your rest instead bruised and battered your tired frame. The mattress problem was so bad that many medieval medical texts actually included treatments for straw-related injuries. Indeed, people were hurt by their bedding. Imagine explaining that to your local healer. Well, you see, I was assaulted by my mattress. The absurdity of it all is tinged with a quiet desperation, a life where even your sleep is a battlefield. Wealthier nobles fared a bit better, having wooden frames for their straw, a difference like being uncomfortably elevated. Yet that slight elevation hardly eased the persistent discomfort or the lingering aches that accompanied dawn. The morning wake-up call was hardly the gentle chimes of a smartphone alarm. Instead, one might be jolted awake by a rooster going through an existential crisis at dawn, or worse, the castle's human alarm clock. 13th century historical documents mention a castle servant whose only job was to walk through the castle shouting, "Wakey, wakey," or the medieval equivalent, at the break of dawn, a job sure to inspire universal dislike. Can you feel the grogginess, the irritation, the reluctant stirring of a body that aches and longs for just a moment more of rest? Medieval castles were not exactly known for great insulation. The stone walls, excellent for keeping invading armies out, functioned basically as giant refrigerators. Many castle residents slept in the clothes they had worn the previous day, not out of laziness, but to avoid waking up as human popsicles. Imagine the cold seeping into your bones, and how each breath feels sharp and shallow in the morning chill, and how the warmth of yesterday's cloak becomes a precious shield against the biting air. Bedroom windows in medieval castles were not the grand glass panes seen in movies. Most were just narrow slits in the walls, designed more for firing arrows at enemies than letting in morning sunlight. This meant that on overcast days, which realistically were most days in medieval Europe, one might wake up in complete darkness, stub a toe on a chamber pot if lucky enough to have one, and start the day with swear words that would shame even a seasoned sailor. After extricating oneself from that torture device, euphemistically called a bed, the next medieval morning trial awaited: personal hygiene. Hygiene was a very flexible concept in medieval times. The immediate presence of a bucket filled with water so frigid it likely still contained ice fragments, was the first thing one would notice, looming menacingly. No warm showers, no sophisticated temperature regulation, just you and your nemesis, the bucket. The mere thought of dipping a hand into that icy water sends a shiver down the spine. It was a cruel awakening ritual that required resolve and grit. Every splash was a reminder that comfort was a luxury few could afford, and that the harshness of medieval life began not just with the rising sun, but with the unforgiving cold that greeted every dawn. Historical records suggest that some of the more innovative castle architects did attempt to devise rudimentary water heating systems. One particular castle in France incorporated a system of pipes running near the kitchen fires. A commendable idea, except the pipes were constructed from lead, presenting a choice between being unclean or slowly poisoned, a difficult decision. Then there was the matter of soap. Modern archaeologists have unearthed traces of medieval soap-making facilities, and the recipes they've uncovered are utterly bizarre. The primary ingredient was wood ash mixed with animal fat. Essentially, they were cleansing themselves with fireplace residue. More affluent castles used something called Castile soap, a slight improvement, as it used olive oil instead of animal fat. But it was so prohibitively expensive that records indicate a single bar could cost the equivalent of a whole sheep. Imagine dedicating your entire paycheck to a bar of soap. The truly fascinating part began when nature called. Recall those narrow castle windows. They served a dual function. Yes, they were for shooting arrows at enemies, but they also functioned admirably as impromptu toilets. Castle architects even had a specific term for these: guard robes, so named because people would hang their garments near them, believing the appalling odor would repel moths. Indeed, they utilized the stench of their restroom to safeguard their finest attire. If one wasn't fortunate enough to have a guardrobe nearby, there was always the reliable chamber pot. These charming receptacles were typically emptied out of windows, giving rise to one of history's most misinterpreted phrases. When people shouted, "Guard low, watch out for the water," they were decidedly not referring to water. This practice was so prevalent that some medieval cities enacted laws prohibiting the emptying of chamber pots without first shouting a warning. Government regulation in action. Communal latrines were an entirely different matter. Most castles had these shared facilities built into their outer walls, essentially holes that deposited everything directly outside. Archaeological investigations of castle remains have unearthed some rather intriguing items in these areas, and let's just say it wasn't all ancient coins and lost jewelry. Some castles could house up to 200 individuals, all sharing a mere handful of these delightful facilities. Morning rush hour acquired a whole new dimension. Privacy was essentially non-existent. Medieval people had a vastly different concept of personal space. Historical documents reveal that even kings and queens would frequently receive morning visitors while utilizing their elaborate private toilets. It was considered an honor to be invited to the royal morning routine. Seriously, imagine being so important that people desired to witness your bathroom habits. Speaking of royalty, they did possess one advantage: personal servants to assist with the morning ritual. But this was hardly a luxurious role. These unfortunate servants had the glamorous task of helping their lords and ladies wash, dress, and yes, manage those chamber pots. Records from an English castle indicate that the position of groom of the stool was actually a highly sought-after role, as it granted such intimate access to the king. The entire morning ordeal could consume hours, particularly for noble women who had to contend with intricate hairstyles and clothing. After all that effort, one would likely still smell like a blend of wood smoke, wet dog, and whatever constituted that day's mysterious medieval soap. At least there was one positive aspect to anticipate: breakfast. Although breakfast might be a rather generous term, the aroma of freshly baked bread was already drifting from the castle kitchens, intermingled with something that might have been porridge, or perhaps gruel, or possibly both. The concept of breakfast in a medieval castle would likely induce a nervous breakdown in modern food critics. The cardinal rule of castle breakfast was rank determined everything. The king didn't just get first pick, he got the first, second, and practically every desirable pick. Actual records from a 13th century English castle reveal that while the king indulged in fresh bread, roasted meats, and exotic fruits, the lower-ranked castle staff received something termed pottage, which was essentially whatever vegetables hadn't yet spoiled, boiled until devoid of all flavor and dignity. Regarding bread, it wasn't solely for consumption. Nobles utilized something called a trencher, a thick slice of stale bread that served as their plate. After 4 or 5 days of service as dinnerware, these rock-hard bread plates would be distributed to the poor, who likely needed teeth stronger than armor to consume them. Now let me deepen the emotional experience for you. Imagine the stark contrast between the grandeur and the grit of medieval mornings. The royal morning routine, a spectacle of intimacy and power, where kings and queens, figures shrouded in mystery and majesty, openly welcomed guests even in their most private moments. The very notion shatters our modern ideas of privacy, revealing a world where status reigns supreme over personal boundaries. But behind this display of power lay a quieter, humbler story: the lives of the servants who bore the burdens of royalty's demands. Their days began early, filled with the laborious task of not only dressing and preparing their lords and ladies, but managing the unglamorous realities of chamber pots and the messiness of human needs. This was a role that required resilience, discretion, and a steadfast devotion, yet it was coveted for the rare closeness it granted to the monarch. Picture the noblewomen, draped in silks and jewels, enduring hours of elaborate coiffing and dressing, only to be enveloped at the end by the pungent smells of wood smoke and medieval soap, an olfactory reminder that no matter the finery, the human condition remained universal and unvarnished. And then the breakfast ritual, so telling of the harsh social hierarchies carved into every morsel. The king's table laden with fresh bread, roasted meats, and exotic fruits, a feast fit for a sovereign, while the servants subsisted on bland pottage, a boiled concoction stripped of taste and dignity. The trencher bread, serving both as plate and later charity, symbolized a world where even the simplest sustenance was layered with meaning. Privilege on one side, survival on the other. This glimpse into a medieval morning isn't just history, it's a vivid tableau of human disparity, endurance, and the complex dance between power and humility. It invites us to reflect on how far we've come, and yet how some facets of human experience, the blend of dignity and hardship, remain timeless. Medieval castle wells were frequently contaminated, thanks to those charming waste disposal methods we discussed earlier. The solution? Beer. Copious amounts of beer. Even children drank it, albeit a weaker version known as small beer. Records from one castle indicate they consumed approximately 8 gallons of beer per person per week, roughly 3,000 pints of beer daily for a medium-sized castle. Brewers were among the most vital individuals in the castle. Botch the beer, and you'd have a castle teeming with parched, irate medieval inhabitants. Table manners. Table manners is a rather charitable description of actual dining practices. Forks were largely absent in most medieval castles, considered excessively fancy in Italy. Instead, everyone used their fingers, leading to some inventive eating techniques. One medieval dining guide actually cautioned, "Do not wipe your greasy hands on your beard." The mere existence of this written advice speaks volumes about medieval dining etiquette. The seating arrangement was a political minefield. Proximity to the lord or lady signified importance. Relegation to the table's far end was a clear indication of some social transgression. A recorded incident from a 14th century castle recounts 2 knights engaging in a sword fight over seating closer to the salt. Yes, salt was that significant. The medieval equivalent of prime Wi-Fi connectivity. Breakfast timing was equally peculiar. Nobles typically ate around 10 or 11 a.m. after attending morning mass. And addressing basic castle affairs, servants, having been awake for hours, likely snatched a morsel of leftover pottage between chores. One castle record complains about kitchen staff pilfering food, noting a cook apprehended with 3 entire meat pies concealed down his shirt. Food preservation was yet another adventure. Lacking refrigeration, medieval castles relied on salt, smoke, and prayer to keep food edible. Now, let's delve deeper into the feelings and atmosphere behind these details. Imagine the medieval castle not as a distant relic, but as a living world brimming with the raw, often harsh realities of daily life. The wells, tainted and unsafe, were a constant silent threat, yet life went on, and beer became the lifeblood of the castle, a humble yet vital elixir shared by all, from hardened knights to innocent children. The reliance on beer, especially the weaker small beer for youngsters, reveals a world where even survival was woven into the fabric of community rituals, where liquid courage and refreshment merged into a daily necessity. You can almost taste the bitterness and warmth of that ale, feel the camaraderie in crowded halls where thirst was no trivial matter, but a pressing, shared challenge. Picture a great hall where manners are fluid, fingers the tools of dining rather than utensils, a vivid contrast to our modern polished etiquette. The advice against wiping greasy hands on one's beard hints at the messiness, the humanity, the very imperfect beauty of medieval life. These were people close to their food and each other, where survival and status mixed uneasily at the table. The seating, more than just practical arrangement, was a map of power, respect, and rivalry. The fact that knights fought swords for a spot near the salt tells us how precious and coveted even the smallest comforts were, illuminating a society where hierarchy was enforced in every gesture. Breakfasts late hour after mass, servants stealing bits of food, cooks hiding meat pies. These small stories paint a lively picture of a castle buzzing with life, fraught with tension and small rebellions. The absence of refrigeration meant that each meal was a gamble preserved by faith and smoke, adding a layer of uncertainty and hope to every bite. Through these details, we feel the heartbeat of medieval existence, raw, complex, full of survival's grit and humanity's quirks. It's a world both foreign and deeply relatable, reminding us that behind the grandeur and stone walls, life was messy, vibrant, and alive. The castle larder, or food storage room, stood as one of the coldest corners of the fortress, a frigid sanctuary meant to preserve precious provisions. Yet even this icy refuge could not fully stave off the slow, inevitable decay of food. The irony is palpable. A place designed to safeguard life's sustenance was haunted by the creeping presence of spoilage. Medieval recipe books, with their blunt pragmatism, offered darkly humorous counsel. If the meat appears green, feed it to the peasants first. Imagine that. A glimpse into a world where food safety was a delicate balancing act between survival and sacrifice. This crude instruction reveals not just practical necessity, but the harsh realities that shaped everyday existence within castle walls. There was a twisted reassurance in such protocols. At least they acknowledged the problem, making it part of the order of things. As the morning feast drew to a close, the great hall began to fill with a cacophony of new scents, not all sweet or savory. The mingling aromas of unwashed bodies, smoldering fire pits, and the random animals wandering through created a pungent tapestry unique to castle life. It was a living, breathing scentscape, at once vibrant and overwhelming, that bore witness to the human and animal chaos cohabiting within stone walls. Consider the floors beneath it all. Far from the gleaming stone surfaces imagined in stories, medieval castle floors were cloaked in rushes, primitive yet practical carpets fashioned from layers of dried grasses and herbs. But here's the unsettling truth. These rushes were only completely replaced once a year. Imagine walking on a patchwork quilt of time, where each step presses into a year's worth of spilled food, mud, animal droppings, and forgotten remnants. Every fresh sprinkle of herbs, be it lavender or meadow scents, was a fragile attempt to mask what was, in essence, a sprawling compost heap right underfoot. Animals contributed their own unmistakable notes to this living environment. Dogs, cats, chickens, and even livestock roamed freely, their presence weaving into the sensory fabric of the hall. A nobleman's prized falcon, apparently quite indifferent to formalities, once chose the dinner table as its personal lavatory, a moment so common it barely stirred surprise. Archaeology has uncovered layers of animal dung embedded deep within castle floors, a literal testament to the blurred boundaries between the indoors and outdoors and the gritty reality of medieval domestic life. The walls, too, played their part in this olfactory symphony. Stone, cold and damp, sweated silently in humid climates, inviting mold to flourish in shadowed crevices. Tapestries, while decorative, were also practical barriers against the cold and moisture. Yet they were seldom cleaned, becoming mini ecosystems of mildew, bugs, and even mice, silent witnesses to centuries of castle life, holding in their threads the unseen stories of decay and endurance. This was life within the castle's heartbeat, a world where beauty and filth coexisted, where survival demanded adaptation, and where every scent told a story of humanity's messy, vibrant persistence against the odds. The kitchen area was truly its own special kind of hell, an old factory nightmare wrapped in stone walls. Imagine the relentless chaos. Heaps of food waste piled up, dishes left unwashed, and a constant symphony of sizzling, chopping, and boiling. All of this combined to create a smell so potent and overwhelming it could easily knock a vulture clean off a garbage cart. It was a stench so thick it seemed to cling to every corner and crevice, invading the noses and souls of anyone unfortunate enough to pass by. Without refrigeration, the castle's cooks had no choice but to hold on to meat until it teetered on the edge of rot, barely fit for consumption. The only way to mask the near-putrid taste was with mountains of spices, enough to make even the most fearless modern chef raise an eyebrow in disbelief. Medieval recipes were essentially a battle against decay, a desperate attempt to disguise the inevitable. One can almost taste the bitter irony of such lavish seasoning hiding the harsh reality of preservation by desperation. And what happened to the kitchen's waste? It didn't simply disappear. No, it was flung straight out the kitchen window, piling into what one medieval writer politely called the castle's own personal mountain of interesting aromas. A polite way of saying it was a festering mound of filth and decay, a daily monument to human survival amid squalor. But the true villain in this olfactory nightmare was the garderobe system, the infamous castle toilets we briefly mentioned earlier. These were not your modern conveniences. Designed to empty directly down the castle walls into the moat or ditch below, they created an unbearable, relentless stench that dominated the air, especially in the summer months. One medieval chronicler even described this foul smell as a unique defensive system, so overwhelming and noxious that it drove some attackers to give up their sieges altogether. Imagine the power of pure biological warfare, fought with nothing but the castle's own waste. Amidst this chaotic swirl of pungent odors, it's no surprise that those living in medieval castles were always eager to escape outside. And speaking of escaping outside, the castle's defensive training was about to begin. These castles weren't just grand stone homes. They were the medieval version of a nuclear bunker, built to withstand the harshest assaults. Their walls were not simply thick, they were defiantly, "Dare you to try thick," a bold statement in stone. Archaeological studies reveal some walls measuring an astonishing 20 feet thick at the base, an intimidating fortress against any intruder. Within these walls, knights honed their deadly skills, practicing archery through tiny, specialized slits designed to allow defenders to shoot arrows out while remaining protected. The challenge? Imagine trying to thread a needle while riding a horse backwards. Nearly impossible. Yet history records archers so skilled they could hit a target no bigger than a dinner plate from 200 yards away through these narrow apertures. The irony? The very same men who couldn't hit the castle latrine in broad daylight. This glimpse into medieval castle life reveals not just the physical hardships endured, but the fierce spirit of survival, ingenuity, and resilience that thrived amid discomfort and danger. The smells, the training, the fortifications, all pieces of a brutal yet fascinating world where life was a constant test of endurance and cunning. Speaking of castle defenses, the mention of murder holes alone sends a shiver down the spine, a term both chilling and oddly precise, echoing the cold pragmatism of medieval architects. Imagine standing beneath those ominous apertures, knowing above you defenders could rain down a merciless barrage from jagged rocks to scorching boiling oil, designed to crush and repel any desperate attacker. The weight of survival hung thick in that air. One castle's account books from 1312 tell a story not only of defense but of inventive cruelty. 2 barrels of oil, 3 bags of quicklime, and most strikingly, 1 very angry beehive. The very thought of unleashing a swarm of furious bees upon intruders speaks to a fierce determination, a will to protect home and hearth by any means necessary. This wasn't merely war, it was a raw, unyielding fight for life. Within these stone walls, everyone had a part to play, even children. Their innocence tempered by harsh reality, they served as messengers or water carriers, caught in the relentless tide of siege warfare. Remarkably, some records reveal that these children found ways to turn grim circumstances into fleeting moments of joy, playing siege games by hurling rotten vegetables at one another from opposing towers. The laughter must have been bittersweet, echoes of childhood daring to resist the looming shadow of conflict. But the castle staff, they surely bore the brunt, cleaning up after these makeshift battles, reminders that life inside a fortress was never without its gritty, exhausting demands. Then there's the moat, often dismissed as mere decoration by romantic tales, but in truth a masterpiece of engineering and defense. More than a stagnant trench, it was a dynamic barrier designed to be flooded or drained in a matter of minutes. Imagine the bewildered attackers scrambling as a once solid ground swiftly transformed into a treacherous watery trap. One French castle's moat fillable within an hour must have been a sight to behold, foiling enemy plans and crushing morale with cold efficiency. The panic, the confusion, it was psychological warfare as much as physical. And at the heart of this ballet of defense stood the drawbridge operator, an unsung yet crucial guardian. Their single task, timing. One false move and disaster loomed. Historical tales recount operators prematurely raising the bridge, leaving their own comrades stranded in the cold or lowering it too soon, welcoming the enemy's advance. A Welsh castle's hapless operator once trapped half a cow beneath the raised drawbridge, a strangely humorous yet telling testament to the precariousness of their responsibility. The cow survived, a silent witness to the chaotic dance of medieval defense. Through these vivid details, the reality of castle life emerges. Not a romantic fantasy, but a relentless struggle carved in stone, sweat, and blood. Every stone, every hole, every barrel carried stories of fear, courage, creativity, and the stubborn will to endure. But it did generate what the chronicles termed a very awkward afternoon for everyone involved. Imagine the tension thick in the air, the uneasy silence broken only by muffled curses and frustrated sighs. The weight of that awkwardness settled heavily on the shoulders of all present, a reminder that even the most carefully laid plans could unravel in unexpected ways. The most ingenious element of castle defense was the spiral staircases. They always curve clockwise going upwards, providing right-handed defenders with a distinct advantage in sword fights. And this is frequently case. But these staircases were far more than mere stone steps. They were silent sentinels of rival, crafted with subtle cruelty. The steps were intentionally uneven, each with a slightly different height and depth, designed so that defenders familiar with every nuance could move swiftly and confidently, while attackers faltered and stumbled, disoriented by the deceptive architecture. Talk about home field advantage. One medieval chronicle even records an entire attacking force being routed because they tumbled down the stairs like a bunch of drunken geese. A chaotic dance of defeat played out on cold stone, where fear and desperation turned once proud warriors into clumsy shadows of themselves. Defensive training wasn't solely about combat, it was about survival. Castle residents had to be ready for prolonged sieges, sometimes lasting months, a grueling test of endurance and willpower. They stockpiled food, weapons, and supplies as if their lives depended on it, because they truly did. The anxiety of waiting, the gnawing uncertainty of what each dawn might bring, hung heavy in every corner. One castle's inventory list included emergency rations of 500 arrows, 200 barrels of salted fish, and rather oddly, 3 juggling balls. Even in medieval times, apparently, entertainment was considered essential, a small spark of light to flicker in the suffocating darkness of siege life. The most successful castles were those that could outlast their attackers, which meant having enough provisions to feed everyone, from the lord down to the lowliest servant. After all that rigorous defensive training, medieval folks needed to unwind, and they certainly knew how to party, albeit in ways that might seem peculiar to us today. Take jousting, for example. You'd think colliding with each other at high speed with pointy sticks while mounted on horses would be perilous enough, but no. Medieval people had to make it even more interesting. Records show that some tournaments featured novelty jousts, where knights competed blindfolded or riding backward, adding a dizzying, almost reckless thrill to already dangerous contests. Dice games were ubiquitous, despite, or perhaps because of, being frequently banned. Castle gambling was so widespread that some medieval account books had a dedicated section for dice-related debts. The games had wonderfully evocative names: Hazard, Cross, and Pile, and everyone's favorite, God's Dice, which was apparently intended to lend a veneer of legitimacy to gambling in the eyes of the local priest. One castle record mentions a servant winning his master's prized horse in a dice game, only to lose it back along with 3 months' wages on the very next throw. The scene conjures a whirl of hope, desperation, and regret, the roller coaster of human chance, where fortune and folly danced hand in hand under the flickering torchlight. But the true luminaries of medieval entertainment were the jesters. These weren't merely individuals in funny hats telling bad jokes, they were medieval celebrities. A skilled jester could get away with saying things to the Lord that would get anyone else summarily thrown into the dungeon. Imagine the weight of that role, walking the razor's edge between humor and danger, wielding wit as both shield and sword. They had to be part comedian, part acrobat, part musician, and part suicide mission operator, because making fun of powerful people was literally their job description. Historical records indicate that some jesters were paid more than the castle's military officers, which really speaks volumes about medieval priorities. Music was also a significant part of castle life, but not like today's concerts. Castle musicians had to earn their keep by playing pretty much constantly. One medieval account lists a musician's daily duties as playing during meals, playing during prayers, playing during work, playing during something else, playing until everyone begs you to stop. You can almost feel the exhaustion and relentless pressure behind those endless notes. The instruments themselves were quite something. They had something called a bladder pipe, which was exactly what it sounds like, a musical instrument made from an animal's bladder. Imagine the strange sounds drifting through cold stone halls, a haunting soundtrack to life behind castle walls. Classy, lavish feasts would often feature something called a subtlety, which was neither subtle nor always edible. These were elaborate food sculptures, such as a pastry castle with live birds hidden inside that would fly out when it was cut open, or a roasted peacock redressed in its own feathers. The shock and awe of such displays must have been unforgettable, a wild blend of wonder, delight, and perhaps a hint of unease. One castle record describes a subtlety that was a life-size knight made entirely from marzipan, riding a horse made of roasted chickens. Medieval food critics would have had a field day with that one. All this entertainment kept the castle's massive staff busy around the clock, from servants rushing to clean up after wrestling matches, to soldiers trying to stop drunken dice players from falling off the battlements. But that was just the tip of the iceberg of their daily duties. Jobs in a medieval castle make modern workplace complaints seem completely trivial. The coffee machine being broken doesn't compare to a dragon-sized bread oven trying to eat Thomas again. You can almost hear the frantic shouts, the heat, the chaos. Life inside those walls was anything but dull. A typical castle employed anywhere from 50 to 200 people, depending on its size, and every single one of them had a job title that would look completely ridiculous on a modern resume. Yet behind these strange titles lay the heartbeat of medieval life, each person playing a vital, often grueling role in the castle's survival. Take the gong farmer, for instance. Imagine the weight of that task, cleaning out the castle's toilets, an unthinkable and filthy chore. But these unlucky souls weren't just any janitors. They were bound by law to work through the dark, lonely nights, shielding the rest of the castle from the unbearable stench. Despite this humiliation and isolation, records reveal they earned better wages than skilled craftsmen. It's a stark, almost ironic reminder that sometimes the dirtiest jobs can pay the highest price, not just in money, but in dignity. The kitchen was another world of relentless toil. Feeding hundreds meant an endless stream of food preparation, demanding about 6,000 calories per person per day, triple what we consume now. The kitchen staff moved in unbroken shifts, their sweat and fatigue hidden behind the clang of pots and the roar of the fire. The head cook, feared and respected, earned the nickname the Terror of Turnips, a testament to the fierce authority needed to keep such chaos in order. Among the kitchen roles were the sauce maker, dedicated solely to perfecting sauces, and the turnbroke, often a small boy tasked with turning the spit over the fire, a job requiring unwavering vigilance. One story tells of a turnbroke who fell asleep on duty, accidentally producing the castle's first overly burnt roast, a small human moment in the relentless machinery of castle life. Guards, by contrast, faced long stretches of boredom, standing motionless and imposing presence, broken only by rare moments of terror when survival instincts kicked in. Their strange duty to sing while on patrol, intended to prove wakefulness, resulted in at least one recorded complaint. Nothing to report except Ralph's terrible singing, a phrase that hints at the lonely, monotonous days punctuated by absurdity. The most prestigious role was the knight, glorified fighters whose lives were far from glamorous. Beyond battle, they bore the heavy burdens of maintaining their armor, training squires, and attending endless ceremonies. One knight's diary reveals the bitter frustration of spending 3 painstaking hours polishing armor, only to stand in cold rain for 6 hours during a ceremony, a harsh glimpse into the sacrifices hidden beneath the chivalrous veneer. And then there were the squires, young men enduring years of grueling, thankless labor, cleaning stables, assisting knights into armor, a process fraught with frustration and medieval curses, the details of which likely never made it into polite history. Their lives were a blend of apprenticeship and servitude, shadowing the glory of knighthood with sweat, toil, and endurance. Through these glimpses, the castle comes alive not just as a fortress of stone, but as a living, breathing world of human struggle, small triumphs, and unspoken sacrifices. Behind every grand ceremony and battle tale, were these countless lives weaving the fabric of medieval existence. Lives that were anything but simple and whose stories deserve to be remembered with all their complexity and depth. Servants had the most diverse job descriptions. You had the keeper of the wardrobe, who didn't just manage clothes but was more like a medieval accountant, the chamber pot carrier, and let's not forget the wake-up person, whose job was literally to ensure everyone got up on time. The castle blacksmith had one of the most crucial jobs, repairing everything from knight's swords to the cook's pots. One blacksmith's log includes repairs for 1 helmet dented in practice, 2 swords bent in anger, and 3 spoons mangled by the new kitchen boy. They also had to deal with endless requests for custom work. A 14th century blacksmith's complaint reads, "Lord wants dragon-shaped door handles again. Dragons don't even exist, but try telling him that." All this work unfolded under the watchful eye of the castle's true boss, the lady of the castle, whose job made modern CEO positions look like a leisurely stroll in the park. Running a medieval castle was essentially like managing a small city, a military base, and a farm all rolled into one. The person in charge of this controlled chaos wasn't always who you'd expect. While the lord was off doing lordly things, usually involving hitting other lords with pointy objects, the lady of the castle was the real MVP of medieval management. Firstly, these ladies were hardcore accountants. Medieval records show castle ladies keeping books that would make a modern CPA break out in a cold sweat. One surviving account book from 13th century castle lists everything from how many eggs the chickens laid to how many arrows the archers wasted shooting at birds instead of targets. There's even a note in the margins reading, "Note to self, stop paying archers when drunk. Terrible aim." Food management alone was enough to turn anyone's hair gray. Ladies had to plan meals months in advance, ensuring enough food was stockpiled for potential sieges. One castle's records show the lady ordering 2,000 salted fish and 500 chickens, and enough grain for bread to feed 200 people for 6 months, all while dealing with medieval merchants who probably thought expiration date meant whenever it stops moving. They were also medieval HR managers, resolving disputes between castle staff. That sounds utterly absurd today. One actual complaint record reads, "Cook refuses to work with John the baker because John's bread is so hard it can be used as castle defense." Another gem says, "2 maids fighting over who has to clean the jester's hat after he fell in the moat trying to juggle fish." But these ladies weren't just shuffling papers when their husbands were away, which was quite often. Medieval lords loved a good crusade or war. They became temporary military commanders. Historical records document numerous cases of castle ladies leading successful defenses during sieges. One particularly resourceful lady in 1150 held off a siege for months by using empty wine barrels to create the illusion that she had more soldiers than she actually did. Talk about creative problem solving. They were also responsible for running the castle's healthcare system, such as it was. Most ladies maintained gardens full of medicinal herbs and had to know which plants could cure a headache and which ones might accidentally poison the entire castle. One medical record shows a lady's note reminder. The red berries are for healing. The purple ones are for getting rid of unwanted guests. Medieval diplomatic solutions were interesting. The lady's job included being a teacher too. She was responsible for educating not only her own children, but also the children of other nobles sent to the castle as part of their training. One teaching record includes a frustrated note. Tried to teach young Lord William proper table manners. He still insists on using his sword to cut cheese. At least he stopped trying to juggle the bread rolls. Perhaps the most impressive aspect was managing the castle's finances. Ladies handled budgets that would make modern business owners break into a sweat. They had to balance everything from paying the guards to buying new tapestries because medieval interior decorating was apparently very important. But even with all their management skills, sometimes these medieval boss ladies needed a break. Usually when someone got sick or injured and needed to see the castle's resident medical expert. Although, considering medieval medical practices, maybe expert isn't quite the right word. Headaches in medieval times weren't just annoying. They were an excuse for doctors to suggest the wildest treatments known to human history. Got a migraine? Here's some powdered emerald mixed with crushed rose petals. Can't afford emeralds? No problem. How about some powdered human skull instead? Yes, that was a real treatment. Medieval medical records show that skull powder was considered such a valuable remedy that some castles kept special cupboards just for storing their collection of therapeutic skulls. These castle doctors, or physicians, as they preferred to be called, likely to sound more sophisticated than guy who thinks everything can be cured by bleeding, had some rather peculiar ideas about medicine. Their medical textbooks read like a medieval version of a horror cookbook. One actual treatment for fever involved shaving a chicken's bottom and strapping it to the patient's head, waiting until the chicken looked sick because obviously the chicken was supposed to absorb the fever. Surprisingly, this treatment didn't make it into modern medicine. Surgery was a whole other level of medieval fun. Anesthesia wasn't really a thing yet, so the best you could hope for was getting really drunk before the procedure. Castle surgical records show that the average medieval operation took about 30 minutes. Having an off day? Let's remove some blood. Feeling overly joyful? Likely an excess of blood. Medieval physicians were convinced that practically any illness could be cured by bloodletting. In one castle's medical records, a doctor prescribed bloodletting for a knight who was deemed too enthusiastic about jousting. The treatment seemed to have the intended effect. Maintaining enthusiasm becomes challenging when lightheaded from blood loss. The contents of a medieval castle's medicine cabinet would likely cause modern pharmacists to swoon. Instead of carefully tested pharmaceuticals, they stocked items such as dragon's blood, unicorn horn, and mummy powder. Precisely what it sounds like: pulverized mummies imported all the way from Egypt. A castle inventory lists 3 unicorn horns, 5 dragon hearts, likely lizards, and a single mermaid scale, probably fish remains of doubtful origin. Dental care was a particularly imaginative affair. Experiencing a toothache? The medieval dentist, often the same person who gave haircuts, offered 2 solutions: tooth extraction or filling it with lead. Indeed, lead, as if medieval populations didn't have enough troubles without the addition of lead poisoning. One castle record mentions a knight who underwent full dental extraction before battle, explaining he wished to avoid toothache distractions during combat. A definitive solution, to be sure. The most astonishing aspect of medieval medicine was its occasional effectiveness, though probably not for the reasons believed at the time. That herb-infused pus applied to wounds. Some of those herbs contained naturally occurring antibiotics. Now, let's explore the emotions and atmosphere behind these strange medical tales. Step back into a world where medicine was as much a mysterious art as a desperate gamble. The cupboards full of powdered skulls speak volumes about a time when healing was intertwined with superstition, ritual, and a touch of dread. Each jar and container was a token of hope in a world where disease could swiftly end a life, and where science as we know it was yet to dawn. Picture the castle doctor, a figure at once respected and feared. With tomes that might horrify modern readers, they wielded treatments that seem bizarre today, affixing a chicken's sickly behind to a patient's head, believing the fever would magically transfer. The mix of earnestness and bewilderment in these actions reveals humanity's relentless pursuit to tame illness, even if by the strangest means. Surgery, with no anesthesia, was brutal and brief, a race against pain and chaos. The courage required not just of patients but of doctors is almost unimaginable. The bloodletting, a ritual as common as it was misguided, paints a picture of a world trying to balance bodily humors, yet often inflicting suffering instead. Inside those medicine cabinets lay the exotic and the fantastical. Dragon's blood, unicorn horn, and mummy powder. Ingredients that ignite the imagination but also reflect the desperation and wonder of the era. The presence of a mermaid scale hints at how myth and medicine danced hand in hand. Dental care was no kinder, with the same person cutting hair and pulling teeth, armed with lead fillings and ruthless extractions. One can almost feel the grit and grim determination of a knight who chose to remove all his teeth before battle to avoid pain and distraction. Such stories echo the raw resilience of people living in relentless hardship. Yet amidst all this, fragments of real healing shine through. The herbal salves, laced with natural antibiotics, hint at a knowledge buried beneath layers of superstition. These stories aren't just about the oddities of medieval medicine. They are a testament to human survival. The fear, hope, trial, and error woven into every attempt to heal and endure in a world that was as perilous as it was enchanting. Those unpalatable concoctions people were forced to drink, the alcohol used as a mixing agent likely killed some bacteria. One castle physician's notes proudly declare that his special cure-all mixture, composed of wine, honey, and various herbs, healed everything from headaches to combat injuries. The wine and honey probably had real antiseptic qualities, even if the rest was questionable. If his belief in its effectiveness came from stirring it 3 times under a full moon as night fell on the castle, even the physicians would put away their alarming tools. However, darkness brought its own kind of medieval entertainment. Ghost stories that would make modern horror movies seem tame. Medieval castle nights made today's horror films look like harmless children's tales. Once the sun dipped below the horizon, these stone fortresses transformed into places of shadows, eerie sounds, and stories capable of sending chills down anyone's spine. Since most people couldn't afford candles, which cost about a day's wages, darkness was the rule. Even nobles were careful about using candles. A castle's expense logs show that monthly candle costs could be more than the entire household's bread budget. Walking around a castle at night was like playing a dangerous game of guess what you just bumped into. Guards carried torches, but these often made shadows bigger instead of smaller, making every corner seem to hide something scary. One castle guard's diary entry from 1342 tells the story. Mistook Lord Geoffrey's new suit of armor for a demon, possibly screamed. Lord Geoffrey is unhappy about the sword damage on his expensive armor. Now I have to work extra shifts to pay for repairs. Ghost stories weren't just fun, they were taken very seriously. Castle records show that some places had official ghost rules. One castle even made a rule that any ghost sighting had to be written down, describing what the ghost was wearing. Medieval ghosts, it seems, cared a lot about fashion. Some of these old reports are unintentionally funny. One guard wrote, "Ghost spotted in the North Tower wearing last season's tunic. Quite disappointing. Suggested wardrobe update for the spirit." Apparently, the ghost was offended and vanished in a huff. The Night Watch held the most unnerving position in the castle. These unfortunate individuals were tasked with patrolling the darkest recesses, typically alone, armed solely with a torch in their own imaginations. Now, imagine the unsettling world behind these words. A place where medicine mingled with superstition, and darkness was not just absence of light, but a living, breathing presence. The healing potions brewed with earnest hope mixed science and mysticism. The wine and honey carried genuine healing power, but the ritual of stirring 3 times under a full moon evokes a deep human yearning for control in an unpredictable world. It's a reminder that even in darkness, people sought light in remedies, rituals, and belief. As night fell, the castle's stone walls closed in like a shadowy shroud. Without the glow of plentiful candles, the darkness became almost tangible, thick with silence and secrets. Every creak, every whisper of wind took on a sinister shape. It's easy to feel the prickling fear of guards patrolling alone, torch flickering, heart pounding. Shadows leapt and twisted, creating monsters from the imagination's depths. The diary entry about Lord Geoffrey's armor reveals a human moment of comic terror amidst the tension. It's a glimpse into the fragile humanity of those who bore the Night Watch's lonely burden, vulnerable to mistakes, haunted by both real and imagined threats, and accountable for the costly consequences. Ghost stories, far from mere entertainment, were woven into the fabric of castle life. The official rules for recording ghost sightings show a society that balanced fear with order, superstition with administration. The fashion-conscious ghosts add a touch of unexpected humor, as if even spirits had to keep up appearances, their own form of vanity lingering beyond the grave. In this world, night was a character itself, unpredictable, eerie, sometimes cruel. And those charged with guarding against threats, both mortal and spectral, lived on the edge of fear and duty, their imaginations their only companions in the castle's deepest darkness. Through this lens, medieval nights become not just a backdrop, but a profound story of human courage, vulnerability, and the haunting power of the unknown. Castle payroll records reveal a curious and somewhat humorous glimpse into the eerie realities faced by medieval night watchmen. These guardians of the night didn't just patrol shadowy corridors and guarded gates, they received supplementary pay for braving areas notorious for uncommon occurrences. One watch captain's log dryly notes, "Hazard pay requested for East Wing patrol. Justification, suits of armor persist in self-rearrangement. Also, convinced tapestries are sentient." The idea of inanimate suits of armor mysteriously shifting or tapestries that judge you might sound like pure fantasy, yet for these watchmen it was part of their nightly ordeal. Further requests for hazard pay for handling judgmental tapestries adds a layer of whimsy to the Dark Watch. Every castle worth its stone boasted at least one undeniably authentic ghost story, woven into the fabric of its history. Among these spectral tales is the legend of the culinary ghost from a Welsh castle, infamous for concocting foul-smelling stews in the dead of night. The truth, however, was far less supernatural. The night guards themselves caught sneaking midnight snacks, incinerating their stolen provisions, and unwittingly creating the ghostly stench. Another haunting tale comes from a castle's library where books seem to relocate themselves overnight. The culprit? Rats, with an oddly refined taste for cheesemaking manuals, much to the bafflement of the librarian. Yet the anxieties of medieval nights stretched beyond ghosts. Castle bestiaries, medieval encyclopedias of monsters, cataloged a menagerie of nocturnal terrors. Night crawlers, likely bats, wall demons, almost certainly mice, and shadow lurkers, probably the castle's stealthy cats hunting those mice. Even the bravest knights were not immune to these fears. One knight's journal recounts a comical yet revealing episode, attacking a supposed demon in the Great Hall, only to discover it was his own reflection in a polished shield. The incident haunted him for a week, leading to an avoidance of shields and a teasing jester who delighted in reenacting the encounter. The jester's ballad about the event quickly became a castle favorite, much to the knight's chagrin. While the eerie knights brought their own brand of unease, the real horror awaited beneath the castle, in the dungeons. Unlike the dramatic torture chambers of Hollywood lore, medieval dungeons were more akin to grim, uncomfortable timeout corners. Archaeological digs reveal that these spaces were roughly the size of a modern bathroom, but with far worse plumbing and absolutely no shower. The dark, cramped conditions were punishment enough, demanding a harsh endurance from those confined within. This stark reality, juxtaposed with the eerie and sometimes absurd nighttime happenings above, paints a vivid picture of life in a medieval castle, a world where shadows and superstition blended with human folly and the hard grind of survival. The castle dungeons, preserved through time, whisper stories cloaked in cold and shadow. Temperature readings reveal a relentless chill, steady at 50 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit year-round, a perpetual cold that wrapped itself around every unfortunate soul confined within. For the inmates, this meant an unyielding discomfort, an endless winter that gnawed at their bones. Yet paradoxically, this very coldness made the dungeons better suited for storing food than the bustling yet foul-smelling kitchen above, a cruel irony where the prison was a freezer and the kitchen a furnace of decay. But life in the dungeon was about more than just temperature. Survival hinged on alliances and influence. Inmates were not passively housed. They were expected to finance their own sustenance and accommodations, transforming these grim cells into the medieval world's most undesirable hotels. The ledger of one castle reveals a nobleman's frustrated complaint, 7 silver pieces charged for rat removal. Yet the rats remained impervious and demanding recompense of their own. The jailer's dry reply? The rats had been promoted to room companion status, no refunds granted. An unsettling roommate situation, to say the least. Another prisoner's entry chronicles his efforts to bargain a group rate, having successfully convinced a colony of rats to cohabitate in his cell. In these dark, damp confines, rats were not mere pests. They were part of the grim fabric of incarceration. Yet even within this subterranean nightmare, hierarchy persisted. The most opulent castles offered tiered dungeon accommodations. Imagine a penal class system in stone, ground floor cells, the premium suites boasting actual windows and sometimes even furniture, a semblance of dignity for nobles who had merely misplaced their manners temporarily. Meanwhile, the basement cells served as economy class, dank, dim, and sharing company with the ever-present rats. One jailer's journal dryly recounts the relocation of Lord Edmund to a lower cell after his incessant complaints about the lack of a view. The punishment was effective. Deprived of any scenery, the Lord penned 3 poems lamenting his lost panorama, a poetic justice, or at least a successful behavioral modification. Nobles imprisoned were sometimes afforded special treatment, though the word is hollow when the setting is a subterranean pit. Records show some brought personal servants to their incarceration. One notoriously fastidious duke insisted on retaining his food taster, obsessed with avoiding the specter of prison foodborne illness. The food taster, however, resigned after a mere week, declaring that sampling dungeon gruel was not in his job description. A testament to how even loyalty had limits when faced with the grim realities of prison fare. Most dungeon inhabitants, however, were not hardened criminals. They were debtors. Medieval accounting books expose a sobering truth: individuals jailed for debts as trivial as the price of a fine cheese. One record notes a man who spent 3 weeks in prison simply for failing to pay for a haircut. The scale of justice was merciless, indifferent to the pettiness of offenses and blind to the desperation of those trapped. Within these cold, dark walls, human dignity was stripped away, leaving behind stories of hardship, resilience, and the strange coexistence of misery and stubborn survival. The dungeons held not just prisoners, but echoes of a world where the line between punishment and suffering blurred beneath the stones. The barber's relentless dedication to collecting debts adds a strangely human touch to the grim reality of medieval imprisonment. Week after week, he would visit the prisoner in the dank cell, not only to remind him of his outstanding balance, but also to offer another haircut, at a special inmate discount, no less. It's a peculiar blend of mercantile persistence and survival. As the prisoner eventually paid off his debt by becoming the prison's own barber, cutting hair for fellow inmates. One can imagine the barber's frustration watching his debtor turn competitor, a twist of fate amidst the harsh economics of dungeon life. Escape attempts were surprisingly rare, not because of unyielding security measures, but because most prisoners were locals with nowhere to run. In the tight-knit medieval communities, everyone knew each other. One failed attempt reads almost comically. Inmate John endeavored to abscond disguised as a washerwoman, plan foiled by maternal recognition and subsequent ear-ragging repatriation. The image of John being caught by his own mother only to receive a stern scolding highlights the odd mix of severity and familiarity in dungeon life. Another inmate tried a subterranean escape, but instead of freedom, he stumbled into the castle's kitchen pantry. Pausing to eat honey, he was promptly caught by guards, a brief moment of sweetness amid desperation. The dungeon keeper's role seemed less about cruelty and more akin to an overworked, underpaid hotel manager. Daily logs reveal a litany of inmate complaints. Jeffrey requested a softer pillow, William complained about drafts, and a persistent merchant in cell 3 hawked real estate deals. One keeper grew so weary of the endless grievances that he begged for reassignment to guard duty. A truly peculiar story comes from a French castle, where an inmate started a small business offering tours of his cell to visitors. The castle had to ban inmates from charging admission fees, so he cleverly shifted to selling souvenir rocks chipped from his cell walls. By the time he was released, he had saved enough to buy a modest home, though the castle wall he chipped away at now leaned precariously, a metaphor for the slow erosion of captivity. Despite these strange tales, the dungeon remained a harsh, inhospitable place. The damp, cold conditions wore down even the toughest spirits. Many prisoners likely wished they had paid their debts, be it for cheese or anything else, promptly to avoid this grim fate. Ironically, abiding by the castle's strict rules was often the surest way to avoid the dungeon's clutches, a lesson that may have been its cruelest design. As dawn broke over the castle walls, the lives of the free and the imprisoned intertwined once more. From the highest tower to the deepest cell, a new day of medieval chaos and survival began, each soul playing their part in this relentless, ancient drama. So, how did you find the story of life inside a medieval castle? Was there anything that surprised you or made you curious to learn more? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a comment, like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. And don't forget to send some good night wishes to everyone. Wishing you a peaceful night and sweet dreams.